So the next step in this process as we're doing the well tie is to figure out where we're going to put the well in this seismic line so that we can start tying and matching our synthetic to the actual seismic data. Now again, we know we can create a synthetic, and we've shown and done that with a well log that we're currently working with. Now we want to see what we need to do to that well log with related to depth and time and phase and so on and so forth to get it to tie nicely with the seismic data. So we notice that we have these well controls, the ribbon that we across here that we touched on previously, very similar to the seismic that really gets into our display. But the first thing we need to do is tell where in the seismic line do we want to place the well synthetic. Now, sometimes you know the X and Y, sometimes it's a little bit different, or maybe I'm using a seismic data that's off the line a bit. So what we're going to do is we're just going to place the seismic, the well synthetic in the seismic line based on this trace number here. Now, there are a couple ways to do that, but the easiest way is, remember, we go to the well button across the top and we hit display properties. And the first thing we'll see is insert at trace number. Okay, so right now the well is at trace number 1. So let me close this window, and I could go all the way to trace 1, and I can scroll here and there. Or there's a button in the well controls, a little zoom with a well on it. It says zoom to well location. If I zoom there, I zoom in, I can see the synthetic has been placed right there in the seismic at trace number 1. I can also see, and I'm going to scroll down in time just a little bit, I can see these formation tops, the cold top and the cold base that were specified with the well log. And they'll go along with the well log. Okay, so as we change the well log, those formation tops are tied to how we define them in there. Now, for this particular well tie, I'm going to I really want this to be somewhere around trace 405 or so. So a couple ways to do that. If I go to my well controls ribbon here, I see a left and right button on my well. And if I click to the right, it'll slowly start to move it. And if I go further along, it always tells me that this well is currently at trace number 11. Again, I want it to be at 405, so I could start clicking on this and do, well, that's really going to be tedious. Or I go to well display properties, and I'm going to type in insert at trace number 405. Great. Oh, where'd it go? Well, it's at trace number 405, but currently we're looking at the seismic data starting at trace 1, and we're only going out to trace 86. So again, I can scroll along, or I can pan and move and change things, or we've got our little handy button here, if we recall, zoom to the well location. I'm going to click that, and now I'm showing that synthetic where it's right about trace number 405. Now let's talk a little bit about the display controls for the well log. First of all, the like I said, the formations are there, and we're going to come across to this ribbon again. We can change the color of the well log, the actual wiggles that we're showing. We can change it. Right now it's showing in black, and if I wanted to distinguish that more, I would change my peak to red so that it really stands out. And you notice any text shown in here that's associated with the well inherits that color. But really, when we're doing a well tie, it's nice to do it with the wiggles and kind of in the same color so that it shows quite nicely. Now, the other thing we're going to do, we're showing, this is a 1D synthetic of the near trace, and we're showing 5 traces of that. And you notice we've got a little space between our synthetic and our seismic data. If we want to alter that, any of those, we go to well display properties, and we can say the number of well traces that we want, and we could make that 3 traces. The margin for the well trace, we can make it bigger, we can make it smaller. This is the scale and the trace gain, and then the fill colors. Our formation color, we can change that, and all of that is really as we're interacting with it, and then going to create some reports, whatever it may be that we would do. So I'm just showing 3 traces. If I look across the well controls, I also notice I have the trace gain for the well, and so I can mark that down a little bit, and I'll scroll up just a little bit on my synthetic and my seismic timeline and zoom out so that I can see everything. And I'm going to bump up the trace gain of my seismic wiggles and the synthetic so that I have that in a nice sense. Now, right now, if we don't want to look at these formations, there's a little toggle here that says hide formation tops. Click that, they're gone. Click it, they're back. For now, as we're doing a well tie, we want to keep those going. And we're showing the 1D synthetic as a conventional primary. The other options would be generalized primary that includes internal multiples, and we'll come back to that. And we could also show the AVO stack if we have that available to us. So now the first thing we want to do is we want to tie our formation tops. Now, I know that in this particular seismic line, at the top of this event right here on the seismic is the top of the coal beds. So I want to line up this red line with the start of that peak event right there. So there are a couple ways to do it, but the easiest way is to move the entire synthetic up. So we're shifting the synthetic. And we can do that incrementally. And along this toolbar, there's a way to shift the trace up and shift it down. I can click it, and it'll move up by a value of the sample rate of the seismic. So, or I can hold it down, and it starts to move up. And so, if we want to shift it in a larger sense, we go to well set depth time controls, and we would type in the value that we want it to do. But for now, I'll hold this and move this up, and you could zoom in if you really wanted to. And we're not really worried about where the formation is in regard to the synthetic, but to the seismic. And you can see, like I said, that the red line of the coal top, the formation top that we defined from the well log, is lining up at the top of that peak event right there. So now that's where our well tie is, and we can see our coal base is lining up here, and I'll bump up the trace gain. So this is our coal base in the seismic data, and it lines up with that event there. So we're good to go there. Great. So now we've moved the seismic data so that it ties nicely. Now we want to start improving the quality of the well match to look at. So one of the things that we like to do is look at the correlation coefficient. And it shows it at the bottom down here. Right now I'm evaluating from 0 to 100 to 1,000 milliseconds, 0 to 1 second, which is well above where we are. And I have a horrible cross correlation, but I don't really care about that area. What I'm looking about is area between, let's say, like 1,800 and 2,100 milliseconds. So what I'm going to do is I go to, remember at the top, I go to well tie cross correlation settings. Again, anything that's doing with the well and the seismic interaction is under the well tie button. And I'm going to hit cross correlation settings. When I do that, here's the top and the bottom time where we're going to compute this value. So I'm going to type in 1.8 to 2.1 seconds. Okay, and so it tells me now it's recomputed. It still don't have a great correlation here, but now at least we're looking at the range. If I want to actually see that range and you can interact it, I go to View, Show Cross Correlation Calc Range. And now there's this black dash line rectangle that shows it. And I can actually drag that, click on it, and drag it up or down. Okay, when I release, as I do, that correlation coefficient changes. So we're really concerned about this from the, from the top of the bed to the top of the coal to the bottom of the coal. So right now, we've got it tied, so we know the coal beds are correct. And we're looking at our correlation coefficient, which is horrible. And as we look at a match, it's not a really good match. Well, how did we create this synthetic? Well, the first thing we did is we applied a wavelet to it. Now that wavelet may or may not have any correlation to what's in the synthetic. So if I look at our wavelet controls toolbar, I can read across here that we've got a 40 hertz Ricker wavelet at 0 phase. Is that something that would be applicable to the seismic data? Well, we're not really sure. So what we're going to do is let's look at the frequency content of the seismic data in this range. So we go to Seismic, Frequency Content Range Settings. Okay, now this is very similar to what we just looked at, the cross correlation, only we're also considering the width of the traces. So I've got a top time, bottom time, left trace, right trace, and I would type those in, and then we would get a nice view of the frequency content of the seismic data. Then we have some idea, is our 40 hertz Richter wavelet really the best wavelet that we should have used for the synthetic? One of the things I like to do is when you're trying to get this started is just say use the current window. So right now, these are just some default values in there from 2/10 to 8/10 of a second, way to the left of this where we're currently viewed right now. So let's check the box that says use current window. And you'll see this red dash outline. So that's the window that we're using to create this spectrum and that we're showing down here. So this is the frequency content over these particular ranges. Now if we want to actually type in exact values, we could do that, or we can drag this up, and we're looking at the frequency content in this area from the seismic data. That's what we've got down here. So we have all this going on. So our 40 hertz Richter wavelet, when we think about that we have applied, really doesn't correlate well with what we have within our seismic data. So we could go to the wavelet and we could try to do a few things, or what we can do is extract a wavelet from the seismic data in this region and then apply it to the seismic and then take a look to see how that impacts. And that's what we're going to do in the next video.